Hey, Haley. I was just about to text you. I thought I had the wrong link.
Nope. How you doing?
Good. Tired today. My notes. Good. People are piling in.
Haley, do you want us to start doing the roll call in the chat or to wait?
I think we might as well start. We'll re-announce it when we officially start the meeting, but for consortium members, you can definitely enter your name in the chat now. And make sure, if you can, that it's reflected in your name in the participant list. And if you're on the phone, anybody who's a consortium member, just kind of give us a verbal cue so that we know to mark you down the number that you are.
Good evening, Governor.
Good evening.
There he is. Wow, we're all eager. I love that we're 5 minutes early. This is great. Thank you for joining us. It's really...
Thank you for having me. I wish we have had a little bit more time. I'll try to give the Reader's Digest version to it. But
Good evening. This is Freeman. How's everyone?
Hi, Freeman. Great to see you.
Hi. Thanks for joining.
Governor, if you'd like to
Hi.
push the limits of your time a little bit, I'm sure everyone would be okay with that. So feel free to say whatever you need
yeah,
to say.
I just wanted to set a broader context, if I could, because starting off as I did 3.5 years ago, there was a lot of work that had already been done, and we kind of had to pick up the ball and decide which way to run with it. And so I'd like to just put some context to that to kind of set the table to how we got to where we are today, I guess.
Sure. Okay. Well, we'll give our 2 minutes, and hopefully everyone will filter in, and we'll get right into it. We don't have a lot to do beforehand, so that should buy us some time. Good to see everybody's faces. So much nicer than when I teach and so many people turn their video off. Noelle, does that happen to you?
Our students aren't allowed to have their video off.
They aren't.
They're marked absent, and we give them a warning and then put them in the waiting room if they turn their video off. So,
What?
Banished to the waiting room. Wow.
yeah.
All right. Good to know. I see Councilman Street, Secretary Bunting, Mr. Simmons with the Lutheran Church, Kelly. Great.
Hello.
Good. Bill.
Don't say my name.
Well, I haven't seen you in a while. How's it going?
Don't say my name.
Hey, John Sheehan. Cool. Great. Okay, we'll just give it a couple more minutes. And I'll just restate for all members of the consortium, if you can please put just type your name into the chat so that we know that you are here. That's how we're doing our roll calls. We don't have to spend that minutes reading the list and listening to the dramatic pause. If anyone is on the telephone and can't type into the chat, just speak, know that you're here so we can count you for the quorum. Hi, Henry Smith, I see you.
Well, hello there, my Senator Elizabeth Lockman. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Great.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jose. It's always fun to see new designees. Okay. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Yeah, as you can all see, before we dive in, hopefully you can see the slide. I'll read it for those of you who can't. These are just our etiquette points. So welcome back to our bi-monthly Reading Consortium for Educational Equity meeting. We have a lot on the agenda today, and even more than we expected, since there's been some really big news in the last 10 days, I guess. So we just ask that everyone, when you are not speaking, that you mute yourself. You can feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. And you may have already noted that we're recording the meeting. It will be posted for public viewing. We have lots of folks who would like to see what's being discussed who can't join us this evening, and we want to make sure that they do that. So we're being recorded, so be mindful of that. And again, if consortium members, if you haven't already entered your name into the roll call in the chat or spoken up verbally, please do that. It looks like we already have our quorum. So we can go ahead and move forward with the agenda. Okay, so this was our big surprise element to the agenda. We knew that we were going to have a lot to talk about with our work groups, but as I think most everyone in the room knows, there was big news in Delaware education last week on Monday afternoon. There was a settlement announced in the state education equity lawsuit. And we are extremely fortunate that we have folks involved with the case, in particular, our governor, John Carney, who's joining us on the First Lady's birthday. So thank you, especially for making time for us on this day. And, so we're gonna hear a little bit of context, a little bit of detail about what's occurred in the settlement. We also have County Councilman Jay Street, who participated on the plaintiff side, to give that perspective. And then we also have our Office of Management and Budget Director, Mike Jackson, to sort of flesh out some of the details. So I don't want to do a lot more ado than that. I just want to get us right into it. So Governor Carney, if you could go ahead and just set some context for us and talk to us about the settlement. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Lockman, and thank you for the work that you're doing with all the other members on the consortium. I didn't hear that your co-chair, Matt Den, was on the line as well, but thank you to him. Special thanks to Jay Street, who I think you're going to hear from in a couple minutes after I'm finished, and the Freeman Williams and the ACLU legal team who were involved in this settlement. What I would like to kind of set the context, because I see the settlement as another very positive step, really important step in our efforts to do the best we can for every child in our state, no matter what circumstances they find themselves in. Going back to my early days as Lieutenant Governor, it was when the first test scores and accountability regime were actually having a real impact. And we saw early on there were significant differences between children of color and those not, between children with more affluent children than less affluent. We ran a program to identify different programs in our state that were proving successful in narrowing what became known as the achievement gap. I like to think of it as the opportunity gap. It's really where I first met Dr. Susan Bunting and the great work that they were doing at Indian River in doing just that, narrowing that gap. So it's a commitment that I have had going way back. When I was elected and we took over in 2017, we had a lot of work that was done by Tony Allen's group, the Wilmington Educational Improvement Commission. Some of those members are on your consortium, and thanks to each of them for their hard work over the years. There were a number of things in there that People want to know what I was going to do. First among them was the whole redistricting question, which had kind of not been approved after being approved by the Christina board or Red Clay board with some caveats. One chamber in the House of Representatives, not the other. And then there are another of really important recommendations. Chief among them, I think, additional resources for children from disadvantaged backgrounds and English learners. After meeting with so many stakeholders, many of whom are on the call, the former superintendents of each of the 4 districts, 5 districts, all of which have been replaced by the current incumbents in those positions, meeting with the president of those boards and some members of those boards, I was unable to get a consensus around what's the best way to redistrict the districts here in Newcastle County with respect to the Wilmington schools. Everybody kind of agreed that it didn't make much sense anymore for Christina to be part of that mix, as was kind of recommended by WEIC. And so we decided, Darrell Green at the time, who came in to head up our Office of Educational Innovation and Improvement, working with Secretary Bunning. They visited all the schools in the city of Wilmington, and they determined that they were all falling a little bit short, but the ones that needed the most help were the 5 Wilmington schools in the Christina School District. And Secretary Bunting's recommendation, time is flying by. Children are moving from one grade to another every year. Let's really focus on improving what's happening in those schools. Let's recapitalize the buildings and rationalize the number of buildings they had. They had only enough students. They had 5 buildings, only enough students for 2. And so we went through that whole process. I knocked doors on the east side and the west side, trying to get parents to engage and come to our town hall meetings. Ultimately, we came up with a memorandum of understanding to move forward and work with Christina, as Darrell did with that team, and Jim Simmons today. All along, we wanted to, really the most important, I think, proposal coming out of the WEIC was what was weighted student funding. So we created the first year, notwithstanding a $400 million deficit, in a nominal way for sure, what we call opportunity funding, which was the first funding we've had in our state that goes to schools based on the enrollment number of children with English learners and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The next year, and leading up to that budget presentation in January of 2019, we went and dramatically improved, added to the opportunity funding, $20 million a year over a 3-year commitment. Wasn't weighted to directly weighted, and it wasn't permanent, which was intentional on my part. I didn't want to just throw money at the problem. I wanted the districts to really be thoughtful about how they were using it. I wanted them to report back to a committee that looked at all those programs so that we could move forward with the best way of adding additional resources to the schools. In December, mid-December that year, I got a call from my good friend Jay Street, who I had met with before a couple times and discussing both the redistricting thing and the funding thing. And he wanted to give me a heads up that he and the ACLU were suing me and the state over the inadequacy, if you will, of what the state of Delaware does for children from disadvantaged backgrounds and English learners. I was eager, frankly, to tell a judge what we were doing and go through all of that. Became very clear pretty early on that all we were going to end up doing was spending a lot of money on lawyers, wasting a lot of time again, and maybe not ending up with anything. So the judge encouraged our lawyers to agree to a mediation process, which we did, because I knew that the interests of the plaintiffs, Jay in particular and Freeman, who I know well, were completely aligned with what I wanted to see happen as governor. And so we did work over a number of months. The lawyers did, me and the plaintiffs on the other side, over a series of meetings of weeks. And essentially what we did was push to what was my limit. I said to Jay at one time, I said, Jay, I am not going to agree to something I can't deliver. I mean, that just, to me, just doesn't make any sense. But we pushed and we pushed, and you're going to hear from Mike Jackson, so that we made a commitment to increase opportunity funding from its current level of $25 million a year distributed based on students to $60 million a year, so more than doubling it, which is really a stretch goal. To add additional resources as we have been doing to early childhood education, because we know how important it is, in particular ECAP, which is a program that targets certain students, to increase the resources and the funding to attract teachers to teach in the more challenging environments in the city schools. There was a proposal in the legislature that many people supported to provide additional funding for K-3, a basic special education, which is part of the agreement. Mike Jackson is on here. He can run you through all those elements. At the end of the day, they pushed us, and I basically said, look, I can only do so much. Mike and I sat down. We knew we were in a very seriously bad financial position. So the plaintiffs allowed us to structure this so it's another year or two out. But the commitment is there for us to go to the legislature, frankly, and have those resources committed. I was always been optimistic because of the support that we've had for opportunity funding from this beginning, and because it helps schools in every part of our state. There are poor children in Laurel, in Selbyville, in Seaford, in Dover, in Camden, in Wilmington, and suburban Newcastle County. And these resources and our focus, most importantly, on using the resources to move the needle for these children will make a big difference. And I just want to thank Jay again for his long years of advocacy. I don't know what kind of relationship Jay and I have, but I figured if Jay and I can't do it, I don't know who can. And we were able to push it over the goal line. I'm sure Jay's going to tell you he's not completely happy with it. But in the end, we wanted to spend money improving the education of children and not on lawyers. And of course, I was always concerned about a judge telling elected officials what to do. So I know that's a little bit long. That's actually my Reader's Digest version. I went through several years pretty quickly, but I appreciate the opportunity to set that context. And the context is simply this: our interest, my interest as governor, my team's interest, Secretary Bunting, John Sheen, who does great work, Mike Jackson, all of our team, our interests are completely aligned with the plaintiff's interest, which is why we push hard to get that agreement. So again, thanks to Jay and Freeman and to the ACLU lawyers as well.
Well, thank you, Governor. It's great to hear the context from your perspective and the receptiveness to get us to a settlement. And I think many of us hope a resolution sooner rather than later for the resourcing issues. So thank you for that. And I think that provides a perfect transition to bring County Councilman Jay Street up to offer us your perspective from the plaintiff side for a few minutes before we open it up to Mike Jackson, and then hopefully a couple minutes for questions. Councilman.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity. The governor was correct. Obviously, I wanted more. We tried to get more, but we had to be realistic in the situation we're in with the pandemic, and reasonable in terms of working with the governor and looking at what was realistic to put before the General Assembly during this, what I consider a crisis situation. I'm gonna go back. I am now 46 years, 10 months, and 22 days in the arena. Regrettably, I'm not going to be able to leave it better than I found it when there was a Wilmington School District, but hopefully I can leave and it'll be better than it is today. The genesis of this, unfortunately, is the lifting of the court order, the school desegregation order, which was officially lifted in November of 1996. And the last page of Judge Robinson's opinion and order said there's nothing in the record below to indicate that current school officials will return to the segregated ways of their predecessors. Unfortunately, before the ink was dry, that's just what they did. They went first to Charter School Act, the Choice School Act with no transportation, and then ultimately the Neighborhood School Act. And thanks to the Wilmington Metropolitan Urban League, under the leadership then of Jim Gilliam Sr., he insisted to the General Assembly when the Neighborhood School Act was about to be enacted or acted upon, that there be a neighborhood school committee to make recommendations. Neighborhood school committee made recommendations, and those recommendations were, when you create all these high poverty schools, you need to have it was a universal concept, but the most outstanding, as far as I'm concerned, was you needed a weighted funding formula for high poverty schools and a reduction in the number of districts in the city of Wilmington. That legislation went to the city modified it a bit, it was submitted, General Assembly never acted. In the meantime, by the time we get to the Wise administration in 2005 in Christina, city schools were fully segregated. And in 2008, there was a Wilmington Education Task Force. It met, made recommendations. Among those recommendations were a weighted funding formula for high poverty schools, a reduction in the number of districts in the city of Wilmington. No legislation was sponsored, no action was taken, and the fact that we were resegregated and consistent with the Brown decision, separate but equal being inherently unequal, we got to see and we were seeing based on performance of the inequality and its impact on low-income children. And at the time, we were primarily interested in the city of Wilmington. We go forward and the Weir Commission made comparable recommendations. Legislation was passed in the House and was rejected in the Senate. And so we got to the point where, and I was trained by especially Irvin Morris and other lawyers involved in this litigation, that you only go to court as a last resort. That's what we did. And I'm gonna quote B. Curl when we had the Coalition to Save Our Children. And we formed that, started out as a Coalition to Save Our Schools. We formed that in 1980 in response to the state's request to go from the county district to 4 districts. And during that period of time, when the Coalition to Save Our Children ended up being plaintiffs, B. Curl said, this litigation is of, for, and about children. And today, I reiterate that this settlement is of the litigation that created this settlement, and the settlement itself is of, for, and about children, but not just children in the city of Wilmington, children throughout the entire state of Delaware, because as we did our research, it was crystal clear that children, not just in the city of Wilmington, but throughout the state, were suffering and needed additional assistance. And we went forward accordingly. I am grateful to the governor, his legal counsel, because I think we were all pushed, and I appreciate the assistance that we had from the mediator and taking us all to task. And at the end of the day, no, I wanted a lot more. I think our children deserve a lot more, but we had to be realistic. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, when you look at that last year, and the $60 million in opportunity funding, and the entire amount just in that last year, and what I think is going to be coming forward from as a result of the county litigation, there was no way we could leave $100 million on the table to help kids and just walk away from that to pick a fight that may have lasted 2 or 3 years. And we purposely and intentionally stayed away from the major task. And the reason for that is we didn't want to usurp what was going on with the Redden Consortium, and in my opinion, not representing any group that I have, your task is awesome because you're going to hear different opinions all the way to my opinion that there should be one school district in Newcastle County, at least in the four, in the northern part of it. You're going to hear people say that we should have a Wilmington school district. You're going to hear people say that we should have all charter schools. And you're going to hear people make a suggestion that we have some other models. And I figured that the young people in the General Assembly who are undertaking this leadership could get their way through that fight. And I would put our emphasis on the money, which is very, very important. The resources are very, very important. And we were able to come to an agreement. And I commend the governor and his legal team. I thank our legal team and our co-plaintiffs, the NAACP, because we're, as the governor indicated, we're all on the same page as trying to do what's best for children. And this governor, I don't want to talk about one of his predecessors in particular, but this governor didn't create this. This General Assembly didn't create this, but this General Assembly is now tasked to fixing what their predecessors, in my opinion, broke. Because those three acts, all of which had a segregative effect, were passed by General Assembly. And the challenge that you're going to have now is, as the General Assembly looks at it, unfortunately, there is still some of that old guard running around Legislative Hall as lobbyists who didn't do anything to help our children when they were in office. And they're going to be, I'm afraid, among the naysayers. But you've got to look past personalities, individuals, what happened in the past. The question before the General Assembly is what's best for our children now? What can we do to be more responsible and come forward and pass something that we all agreed on? And quite frankly, look at the data, and I see Mayor Pazicki sitting there. We're already at 150 shootings in the city, and we're not talking about people who are the shooters or the people getting shot who were honor roll students on their way to college. And either we fix this with the resources that we're starting out with here, or you're going, unfortunately, end up building another jail. So I'm happy, excited about what we are able to accomplish, and hopefully going forward, it will, when I'm no longer playing in this arena and everybody who has to make a decision now is no longer playing, there'll be something there for those who follow in our footsteps to be able to have to work with it. It'll have some longevity to it and benefit low-income children and children with special needs for a long time to come.
Thank you, Councilman. That really, gave us the full picture, and I thank both of you, for the work and the good negotiations that have gotten us to this point. It definitely is a daunting task ahead to navigate from here and figure out the way the resources are going to drive some of the other reforms that you talked about. So I want to be mindful of time, but we are going to invite OMB Director Mike Jackson up to walk us through the specific details of the plan and maybe give us, some sense of how we will be navigating our way through the timeline represented here. And I encourage everyone to continue to add your questions to the chat, your thoughts. There's some really great dialogue happening there. We will probably be pretty moderated in how much time we have to actually do Q&A, but we'll see what we can do. So Mike, could you
Sure.
thank-
Sure, Senator. So thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me
Yep.
okay.
Great.
Just a couple of points to pick up where the governor and the councilman left off overall before I touch base on just a few details. The first is we have to keep in mind that the settlement touches every district across the state. Every district, while at different degrees, has low income as well as English learners within their respective boundaries, as well as the charter schools. The second, as the governor had shared, the investments are intended to be done in a sustainable way over a period of years that would be included in the governor's proposed budget each year to the General Assembly. And then the last is that, and I think that this is a really important point to make, a lot of the settlement is geared towards initiatives that have already been adopted and approved by the General Assembly, while not at the dollar amounts that are in the settlement, but they are programs that are already in place. The majority, not all, are already in place, and the next steps on this settlement is making the Opportunity Fund permanent, meaning in the statutory requirements for how we fund our schools, as well as adjusting pieces of how we as a state fund children with special needs in grades K-3. So I'll highlight a few points. And the first is obviously the opportunity funding. As the governor had mentioned, there's a $25 million investment each year. The settlement requires that annual investment to grow to $60 million with an initial request of the General Assembly that will be included in the proposed budget that gets released in January of an increase of $10 million. So the proposed budget will include growing the Opportunity Fund from $25 million to $35 million, and that by fiscal year 2025, the total amount of funding that is hopefully in the Opportunity Fund is $60 million. Obviously, to be distributed on a weighted basis and a per student basis to children that are low income as well as English learners. Just for a frame of reference at this point, what is included in the budget is that the English learners are funded at $500 per student. Low income students are funded at $300. If you are classified in both of those categories as a student, you receive $800. Ultimately, this settlement will, at a minimum, double those amounts, at a minimum, by the time the $60 million is fully in the budget. And then once it is, the per student amount, obviously that can change by policy, but the overall funding will grow based on enrollment. So as more students are classified as English learners and low income, funding will continue to increase and hopefully at least the same per pupil amount, which is consistent with how by and large, the majority of school funding is distributed. While under a slightly different model in the unit system, it all grows with enrollment. There's another piece to this, and I think it is on your agenda a little bit later around referendum reform. But a little known fact on the Opportunity Fund is that currently today, school districts have the ability, even though it is not required for them to receive funding, they do have the ability to levy what would be called a match tax through a vote of their board in order to enhance funding for the Opportunity Fund. That component will continue as part of the settlement, and that as we move through making this funding permanent, obviously there will be changes that are going to be proposed to the Delaware Code that includes that provision, but also make sure that it continues to grow with enrollment. The second piece of this, and it has been a legislative initiative for a number of years, is creating parity in funding for children who are classified as basic special education. Right now, we have a system where there are children who are in grades 4 to 12 receive a greater level that are classified as having basic special education needs. This settlement will require the governor to, by fiscal year 2024, propose to the General Assembly that both of those groups of children are treated equally. there already is funding in the budget that makes incremental, has made incremental changes over the last 2 years, but this settlement brings it to completion. And if most of you, I'm sure, recall that I believe Representative Kim Williams was a champion of this initiative, and there has been previous legislation around it, but there is funding in the budget right now, and this will grow that to a level of parity. The other piece is the Early Childhood Assistance Program. As many of you know, there's a program in place that funds just under 900 students to provide early care for those who may not meet all of the federal requirements to qualify for Head Start. This settlement will double the amount of students that can be served through the Early Childhood Assistance Program, and the funding amount will grow from $6 million to $12.2 million no later than fiscal year 2024. And so what I talked about is primarily funding that is going to impact the classroom, whether it is through the K-12 level or the pre-K programs in our state. There's also an element to be able to provide resources for educators that are teaching in high need schools starting in fiscal year 2023, to where the governor will recommend an increase in funding by $4 million annually towards initiatives to recruit and retain educators in high need schools. And there are pieces of that that still need to be developed. The final three pieces of the settlement include the creation of a community ombudsperson program in each county in the state through a contracted non-state entity to really provide resources for families that need help navigating within their particular school districts on potentials of disparate discipline treatment, inequitable access to school programs, or otherwise unfair or different treatment of students. And there will be a proposed funding level to be able to get the Ombuds program started in next year's fiscal year 2022 budget. And then just the last two pieces is one is on the certificate of need. As all of you know, districts, before they're able to go to referendum, have to get a certificate of need adopted by the Department of Education before they go to their voters. That process will now include an equity statement that details how the capital improvement plans in a particular district are supporting disadvantaged students. And then last is a holistic funding assessment where recommendations would be due by January of 2024 through a third party on school finances in Delaware. So I said a lot. I tried to give a little more detail. I'm sure I can speak on it much longer, but I know we're also limited in time here.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Senator, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. So we have, maybe a little under 10 minutes. So we only have time for probably a couple of questions. I saw one that I thought was a low hanging fruit question in the chat. Can you talk about the role of the state legislature in terms of approving those numbers into the budget each year? Or does the settlement ensure this funding was the question. So how does that work mechanically? Can you describe that a little bit for folks?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. Probably best that the lawyers describe that, but my obligation as governor, which I will take very seriously and follow through on, is to propose, as Mike said, those amounts within my budget proposal that goes to the General Assembly every January. There are specifics there. They are basically building on programs that are already in place, as you know, for which there's great support. In fact, that one idea on K-3 basic is primarily has been primarily a legislative initiative. Mike accurately pointed out something that I didn't mention. Is the opportunity funding essentially now has weighted student funding, and it grows with the student population, which is important. It's consistent with the recommendations for that in many of the reports that were done, and something that ultimately I wanted to accomplish, but I wanted to go step by step so that we were evaluating the use of the funds as we went. So my obligation is to do that, and then to do as we always do, which is to try to work with the legislature to get it done.
Great, thank you. And that is a good segue to another question I'm seeing before I open it up, which is, do we know how our opportunity amounts, I assume that means the per student amounts, compare to some of our neighboring states like Maryland as they stand now?
Yeah, no, we looked at that through as we were trying to develop a target. The first target was actually something that was discussed. Mike was on the subcommittee, finance subcommittee of WIG, which was a total of $50 million a year. So we plus that up to 60, you know. My focus on that was what can we actually do and do it and do meaningfully. As I said to Jay more than once, I don't want to agree to do something that I can't deliver. Mike and I went over hard the numbers and what we thought about economic growth, revenue growth, you know, all that kind of stuff to figure out whether or not we could make this work, and determined that we could. The hardest part is going to be up front. You know, we're looking at we got some good news at DFAC, but we're still a couple $100 million short. And so our obligation this next budget isn't as great as it is in the years after that, intentional, thanks to Jay's and Freeman's willingness there and recognition of the very serious situation we're in. We're going to be, we'll be stretched to maintain what we have now and to make that first additional step.
Thank you. Well, we have, you know, maybe a little, just a time for one or two more questions. I wanted to see if anyone in the room wanted to raise their hands, any consortium members. And for non-consortium members, you can please continue to enter your questions. We will follow up on those. If not live, we'll certainly do it with a post-meeting document. So I'll just give it a second if anyone wants to raise their hand or their voice for the question, the governor, for the councilman, the director of OMB.
I have a question for the governor.
Oh, go ahead, Maria.
When will you get the results of the opportunity funds?
I'm not sure what you mean, but
you had said that when you put the opportunity fund, that you wanted to take it slow so
right.
that you would know what impact those
right.
funds had on the children.
Right.
I
Yeah.
was wondering if you have a report back yet.
Not yet. I'm going to defer to Secretary Bunting, but we have a committee, broadly based committee that's been working, that's been looking. Everybody's done a little bit different, which I think is really good. And then we can determine what works. Some have invested in early childhood education. Others have invested in social emotional support. Others have invested. Some of it has to, by determination of the legislature, go to reading specialists and math specialists. But Maria, you're right on it. We need to make sure that these additional resources are having the intended impact and what works and what doesn't. That's a very important part of it. I don't know if the Secretary Bunting wants to elaborate on the reports that they've gotten so far, but I know that committee is up and running. In fact, Darrell Green is the chair, I believe.
We actually have 3 ways that these funds will be evaluated. We set actual goals with the superintendents of each of the districts and the charter schools based on the current proficiency level of the English learners and the low-income students, as well as all students. And there is a follow-up. We actually have mid-year and end-of-the-year conferences. Much of that was determined in the past by the state test. We did not have that test last spring because of COVID. But another way that we're evaluating that whole investment is through a company. RAND was hired to do an overall look at what is the impact of this investment. Their report will be out. It's in its final draft process. They'll get it to us in the next couple of weeks. It's actually due because of the non-administration of the test. It's actually due January the 1st or January 15th, I think, but it's almost ready. I talked to them last week. The third way that this will be evaluated, the governor mentioned, is by an oversight committee led by Darrell Green and comprised of parents. There are 11 or 12 community members and principals and so forth. It's a well diversified group, and those members are devising their own ways of investigating what's happening, what the impact happens to be. The group was very active prior to COVID. It has not been able to meet in person since COVID hit, but Darrell will get that group up and running again now that the school year is starting. So it will be, the funds will be evaluated in 3 different ways, Maria, and that RAND study should be finished in the next month and out to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. I don't see any hands. I'm going to throw it to my consortium.
This is Anthony Del Colo.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't raise my hand because I'm on
Okay.
I'm on a line. I apologize.
All right. Go
Sorry,
ahead,
Kizzy.
Anthony.
This is thank you. So my question, and this is in part to create a record because I think it's important, and this is a meeting where we have a record being created. But you know, as members of the legislature, and given the magnitude of what we're trying to make sure is accomplished here, I'd love to understand the ramifications of the actions that the legislature needs to take, and you know, the process whereby folks may propose changes or do things sort of as Councilman Street alluded to, and therefore what our obligations are in terms of getting this done and advocating for it. And you know, obviously there's certain things that have been agreed to that presumably can't be modified in order for the agreement to be, you know, for the integrity of the agreement to be maintained. So I just wanted to understand that and understand the legislative obligation to make sure that we're meeting the call to address this, you know, extremely important concern.
So I'll just take a shot at that. My understanding is that our obligation is to fund the minimum amounts that were in the list that Mike just showed, or we could end up back in court.
Can I respond to that
Okay.
by adding that there's nothing in the settlement that prohibits you, if money is available, to increasing the amount of funding for those opportunities.
Good point.
Thank you, Jay, for adding that important fact.
It is a fact.
That's a very important plug, Councilman. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right. I think we've heard it described, the settlement terms described as a floor and not a ceiling for what the legislature could do, right? In lots of ways. So great. Anyone else have a comment or question before I have Matt say a few words?
Aaron, I have my hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
I just wanted to say for those of us who are actual practitioners and working in education, to Mr. Street and to everyone involved in this settlement, thank you. As you said before, it's about children. And while we're having some great conversation, I wanted to say thank you on behalf of so many that are not able to speak tonight. This is very welcome news.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron, and to all of our practitioners on the line. I will point everyone to the slide that's up right now. We are having a follow-up meeting for the consortium next Wednesday, really just to spend an hour talking about our role as a consortium. And so we can dig into some more of these comments and questions there as well. And so Matt, you had a couple words?
I'd like to just say one thing
Sure.
that somebody I think underscored before, and that is, Jay did, and that is that the work of the consortium is really important, particularly with respect to the redistricting problem. Jay took us through all of those and the recommendations and the like. We're going to continue to focus on doing the best to improve the physical facilities of those 5 schools in Wilmington, Christina School District in Wilmington. Hopefully build a new school on the east side. We're still committed to that. We've consolidated at the recommendations of the principals and the team there with respect to east side and west side. We've converted as Senator Bunting, as Secretary Bunting has recommended, Stubbs into a early childhood center and a parent support center, and that's really going quite well. We've been very lucky that the ILA has agreed with the district to take considerable space in Elbert Palmer and South Wilmington for a training center. We're still working there with Pulaski. I say all that because the goal with all that is to say and pay for that 100% with state funding. If the consortium comes up with an idea, this is what it ought to look like, that you'll have buildings that have been recapitalized, a new building in one case, and all those difficult things, frankly, have been dealt with, and hopefully improvements in the classroom as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Governor. And I just wanted to add really quickly, echo what Aaron said in terms of thanking both the governor and Jay Street for and their colleagues for resolving this. And I think both of them said it's not everything that either of them want to do, and I don't think that it's everything that we on the consortium want to see happen. But it's a critically important first step, and it puts these children in a much better place than they were before. And one piece of it that I just want to emphasize, the amount of money is important, but so is the predictability of the money and the fact that schools and school districts can count on it going into the future and make decisions based on having it. And there have been other times in the past, back in 2009, when the stimulus bill was passed, we had over $30 million in Title I money come into the state, over $30 million in IDEA money, but it was one-time money, and schools and school districts were really reluctant to make long-term decisions based on it because they knew that it wouldn't be there for the long term, and people were reluctant to take on job responsibilities with those funds because they knew they were temporary. So it's great to have the amounts, but also to know that it's going to be there is going to let our school districts make really good decisions in terms of how to use that money in the long run. So we're grateful for that reason also. And finally, just picking up on Jay's last comment, we're, as I said, grateful for this resolution. We're also, as a consortium, working through some interim recommendations that we are hoping to get to you and the General Assembly in December, so that they'll be in your hands in times for your budget discussions for some other items that we think are important. And then based on what we've heard you say in public, we think you view as important as well in terms of early childhood education, wraparound services, professional development, things of that nature. And I think that you will find them to be thoughtful, and we're going to be working very hard to get those to you in December, so that when you're going through the task of putting together your budget and talking to your colleagues in the General Assembly in January about the budget, that you'll have our recommendations in hand, our help in deciding how best to allocate some of those funds. But thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. Okay. And I think with that, we're going to wrap up the portion of our agenda dedicated to the settlement. Again, we will have a public consortium meeting for an hour next Wednesday evening to talk about our response as a consortium and path forward. So,
Madam Co-Chair and Mr. Co-Chair, tonight is my wife's birthday, so I'm going to excuse myself if I may and take her out to dinner. And so
send her our birthday wishes, please.
I will. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening. Okay. So if we want to go ahead and advance the slides, we now have the rest of our meeting to talk about our work groups. As we know, when COVID hit, we did have to do some pivoting in our timeline and what our work focused on, but rest assured our work groups, many of you who are in the room right now have been working extremely hard, particularly in the last couple of months, to fulfill our mission and our commitment to be an action-oriented body that delivers recommendations either for legislation or for items that need to be resourced. And so our three work groups are going to be before us tonight, giving us a draft of what they hope to have us as a consortium approve to move forward on in December. So this is your opportunity to see what they've been doing, give your feedback, give it your thought, so that we can send them back to finalize this work for our final approval in December. So we'll just go right ahead into it and invite the chairs of our funding and governance work group up, Representative Nandish Quocha and Eugene Young, President of the Urban League. Can you let us know what the funding and governance work group has been up to?
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Den, Chairperson Den. Just thank you all for being here. And also, I just want to say thank you so much to Councilman Street for all the work that you've done, and also Governor Carney and all the others that have contributed, ACLU, NAACP, all those that have been involved along this process. I guess I will, if it's all right with you, Representative Quocha, do you want me to start going and then you'll jump in? I just want to
Yes, sir, that's fine.
We're on the same page. Okay. So We are the Funding and Governance Work Group. My name is Eugene Young, and I'm here with Representative Chukwocha. We can go to the next slide, please. Our focus areas have been, it's been interesting. We've kind of shifted around a little bit since we initially started. I believe that time was in May, once we started grappling with the pandemic. But we've been meeting in August, connecting back up with one another in regards to an outline on the following. A, short-term funding focus, which we were working on the referendum reform, background research, Newcastle County tax district, opportunity funds, in particular monitoring and making information transparent, and also the CARES Act funds, once again, monitoring and making sure information is transparent. Our long-term funding focus is around the financial needs for high poverty schools and systemic issues in the Delaware education funding system. If you could go to the next slide, please. So as we discussed a little bit earlier, we had to kind of shift gears in the summer because of COVID-19 priorities for a lot of our administrators here on this call. And so one of the things that we started diving into was referendum reform, goals to create an engagement strategy focused on referendum reform to ensure work groups hear the community and their opinions to inform their work. B is to communicate the work group's approach in clear, concise, and transparent way that conveys why referendum reform is so important. What are our goals and impact of change that it will have on individuals? In particular with this, I think of, meetings that we had. I know Ms. Tika Hartstock always brings up the fact that, we need to be very much focused in the community and making sure that members of the community are able to still feel as though that they're involved, they're able to be involved and engaged along this process, not just in the kind of the creation of potential legislation, but also as we move forward, and what does it really look like for the residents of many of our communities. So for number 2, use research data and stakeholder engagement to create a deliverable that informs a piece of legislation on referendum reform to be introduced in 2021. And go to the next slide. And I'm going to move a little quickly because I know we're kind of short on time, as I can see Senator Lockman nodding her head. So we are we've had discussions based on recent efforts for the referendum reform. HB, or House Bill 129, which was initially the prime sponsor in the House was Representative Jakes, Representative Earl Jakes, and the prime sponsor in the Senate was Senator Sturgeon. And so I believe the bill was, please tell me if I'm wrong, I believe it was caught in committee. That's the furthest that it went. So we've actually had Representative Jakes come out. Senator Sturgeon has been I feel like she's been in every one of our meetings. But Representative Jakes came out, and we also had we had a work group meeting with many key stakeholders to discuss pros and con viewpoints of the actual referendum reform bill. So everyone, as you can see, the Delaware State Education Association, Delaware School Board Association, Delaware Association of School Administrators, chief financial officers from Red Clay School District, legislators, and members of the public. Very robust conversation that we're very much appreciative of, and we had some other financial officers from some of the other school districts as well. And we appreciate them being involved along this journey as well. We go to the next slide, please. So there were a variety of takeaways from our breakout session that we had. I believe our session was last. We've had multiple meetings, so I want to say it was September. We had that was our breakout session. And there are a lot of great takeaways. I'm not going to belabor and read all of them to you, but if you care to scan all, I'll give you a couple seconds. I'll give you about 30 seconds just to scan them. And once again, this is being recorded, so you can go back and take a look at your convenience, but I want to give you some time just to take a look of if there's anything you see that sticks out to you. So here's some of the pros and cons that were offered from the referendum reform from our work group discussion. And so we're going to go to the next slide. One of the key points about this, and it kind of goes back to what Tika Harstock said and others about the fact that we have to engage community members. We have to not just, it's not just a Wilmington and Newcastle County thing, it's up and down the state. And so we're beginning the first steps of potential town halls, working on one-pagers on referendum reform, obviously social media, questionnaires, op-eds, but more importantly, we're focused on engaging different groups, parents, families, students, school boards, community groups, PTAs, ARP, realtors, business community, any groups that would be impacted by this legislation. I mean, it has come up, even I remember in our work group that one of the biggest issues that has come up is around our seniors. And Representative Jakes brought it up and also was brought up in our work group. So we want to work with and have conversations about these issues and how we can work together and making sure this is crafted so that all parties feel as though they're getting something out of said legislation. Can we move to the next slide, please? Funding and governance work group next step. So we're considering viable changes to 129. We'll be having another group meeting soon, actually. We're crafting, as you saw earlier, crafting an engagement strategy and moving forward. We welcome all of your feedback. So you can please put any thoughts that you may have in the chat. Haley often opens her, is kind enough to kind of filter any emails or any specific thoughts that you may have to the group. So Haley, if you wouldn't mind putting your email in the chat, thank you so much. Just if you have any questions about this referendum reform bill, we're also meeting with, continuously meeting with stakeholders and also discussing the funding settlement, how it kind of works within our subcommittee in regards to referendum reform, but all the overall, and I know Representative Chicoche will probably say something about this, in the overall aspect of our work within this subcommittee. Our next meeting dates are November 5th. See you later. November 5th and 19th from 5 to 6. 5 to 6:30. I'm sorry. And are there any questions? But before we go to questions, I would like for Representative Chicoche, because I know he has some things he'd like to cap off real quick.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. Great job. And I mean, those key points really touched it all, not to belabor or go over our time anymore, but really just to say that we really, as a subcommittee, believe that this issue, especially of referendum reform, is a core equity issue throughout the state. And we believe it's something that can help galvanize additional support for the Reading Consortium as we go forward. So we're working to build that coalition in every county, with every district, to build support, the support that is needed to have a viable piece of legislation that is truly can not just get to committee, but get out of the committee and reach the floor for a vote, and hopefully be successful in truly addressing the issues for local, especially in terms of local funding and support that our schools and children need. So we're there, and again, we're trying to really take the feedback in, looking at the engagement strategies and looking at it again statewide in terms of this equity issue and building the community-based support, legislative support throughout our state for this issue.
Thank you. And I just popped the link in because you talked about using House Bill 129 from the 150th as a base. So if folks are interested in taking a look at the tenets of that bill, the link is in the chat. Do we have any questions? I know people don't always have the ability to raise their hands, so feel free to just, I think we have, Haley, let me know, how many minutes do we have before the next presentation needs to get going? 3 to 5 minutes? Okay, great. So anyone have any particular questions for you know, the work group on the specifics of this legislative recommendation and work, or even some of the other priorities that have been discussed. Open it up for any questions or comments. Silence is approval, I guess. You guys just nailed it. Okay, great. Well, if anything occurs to folks, of course, feel free to put it in the chat, either openly or privately to the co-chairs of the working group, to me, to Haley, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And if that is all, well done. That actually probably puts us back on our timing track.
There we go.
Thank you very much, and I hope to be there November 5th.
Good
Okay.
job, Eugene.
Oh, yes. Tika, I felt your presence there. Maria, did you want to say something? Nope. Okay. So that brings us to probably our sort of our longest standing work group, our educator work group. This was the topic area that really rose to the top of the pile when we were crowdsourcing from consortium members. What is our greatest area of need for equity? And so we have our co-chairs, I think both. I know Noelle Picara, an educator at Kuumba Academy, and Representative Michael Smith are here to talk about the recommendations that they have been evolving for a number of months. So however you want to take that away.
So,
If you guys could walk us through where you're. Oh, hi. Hi.
Noelle is going to go ahead and walk us through everything, and then I'm happy to field questions when we're done, just so my youngest stops popping up in front of the screen for you guys to distract.
Great.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. So basically, when we first started the consortium, one of the issues was that we had such a quick turnaround time. We didn't fully have time to engage all the stakeholders that we wanted to get feedback from, especially students, teachers from a wide variety of schools. We knew from the research that high quality teacher retention in schools was one of the biggest determinants in student success. So because of COVID, since we weren't able to necessarily move forward in that legislative session, it did actually buy us some time to be able to refine these recommendations. And of course, we're also in an ever-evolving landscape. There's the pandemic, and then also now we have this historic lawsuit. So I think that as far as the settlement goes, we'll have even more information to talk about next week. But I'm here to share with you kind of the work that we've been doing since May. So basically, we kind of narrowed down our 4 recommendations to focus on 2 of them, which was the Grow Our Own program and the professional learning package for the whole school, which is going to be offered to high need schools within the city of Wilmington. So yeah, basically we were engaging stakeholders. We also realized on our work group, we didn't have full representation from a lot of stakeholders. So we did expand our work group in order to do this in the past year and tried to really be focused in who we were involving in our work group and their reach as far as reaching out to more stakeholders. We also kind of really fleshed out an implementation plan as far as what these recommendations would look like. So first, I'll talk to you about the Grow Our Own program. And of course, as Eugene said, we're going to have these slides on the website next week. And so you can read those in more depth. But the Grow Our Own program, basically, when we looked at the research, you know, there's the funding in the settlement to recruit and retain high quality teachers. Sometimes we would think, you know, then we'll just increase teachers' salaries. But what we found in the research was that that was not necessarily a determining factor for teachers as far as becoming an educator and staying an educator and where they wanted to teach. What we found was much more important was to be able to grow our own high quality teachers and give them the support that they needed from the impacted communities themselves. You can go ahead, Haley. So here's the details of the implementation plan that we're sharing with you. So you can review this again. I'm not going to read it all out loud. But basically, we're thinking about engaging high school students through academies, and then also engaging with community members, school support staff, to help them to become teachers if they're looking to become teachers. We're helping to recruit and retain students from the impacted communities in higher education. So we have a lot of representation of higher education. And that's the short-term plan. As far as the next year, we're working to develop those plans. You can go on, Haley. And then basically we would be in the following year, kind of determining which organizations are going to take the lead on that. We would be evaluating the teacher academies and looking at a longer implementation plan and evaluating that. You can go ahead, Haley. So here's just some details about how we would monitor that program. And again, as many people were saying before, we want to make sure that we're actually being effective in these plans and to be able to refine them as needed so that there's the biggest impact for student success. And one thing I wanted to pull out of that slide as well is just that we want the teacher and administrative, the teachers and the administrators in the school to mirror the demographics of the school itself as much as possible. So we went back and forth about that a lot as far as, do we want to say diverse? Do we want to say particular teachers of different demographics? But really what we want to say across the board is that they can accurately represent and mirror the demographics of those students. So you can go ahead. And then this is the other recommendation that we were focusing on for now, which is the whole school professional learning package. So this is a pretty comprehensive support program. One of the things that we found was the biggest indicator of high rates of teacher turnover was the leadership in the school, and making sure that the teachers were actually supported by the administrators, and that they had the resources and support that they need in order to be highly effective teachers. So this is not just like a one-off PD. This is a sustained program where it would be tailored specifically to that high need school. And then we would work with them over time in order to implement a plan specifically for them. This was a really strong recommendation because it had already been proven to be successful in an existing program in Laurel and Seaford. But of course, we're not going to do a cookie cutter, to the Newcastle County schools. We would create that specifically for them. So again, here's some details. I'm not going to read through everything out loud, but we would be at first figuring out who was eligible, which of the schools would be eligible for this package, and making sure that they're aware of this and that they're able to apply for it. Then we would be finalizing which schools would be doing this program. We would start to implement the programs with the schools. And then following that, we would again be evaluating, monitoring, and refining that as needed. And thank you very much. I see in the chat from Paul about collaborating with Rodel. Absolutely is really important part of engaging with stakeholders, is that we don't want to duplicate efforts. So we want to make sure that everyone who's doing the same kind of work is working together. So I really appreciate that. We can go on. So these are some of the factors that we wanted to look at. And we had a lot of teachers on the work group in this year who really agreed as far as like the school climate was important. to assess and really get in and get evaluations from the teachers themselves. Looking at student achievement through multiple measures, student attendance, and teacher and leader participation. And so our next steps, we also have a small group who is working on the language in the recommendations to make sure that we're very specific about saying who we are serving and what we're doing. I think one of our biggest concerns was that now that we have this funding, we don't want the funding to go to schools that are already well-resourced because the languaging is not clear in the recommendations. We want to make sure that we're very accurate and specific about who we're serving, and that we kind of take out vague words like just diversity and things like that, unless we really describe exactly what we mean, and making sure that they're up to date as far as what kind of language is being used in these kinds of programs. So we have a small group that's working on that right now, and we'll be bringing that final document to you on December 10th. So I also see Roger's point, and again, totally agreed. We need diverse teachers and administrators in all schools, even with predominantly white students. Yes. So that was a big part of the consortium's task, was teachers of color and diverse teachers of lots of different backgrounds, making sure that they are, I think some of the language we had was teachers that have been historically underrepresented, or people who've been underrepresented as teachers, that we would make sure that we engage them and help them to become teachers. So that was a lot. And let me turn it over to Mike if he wants to add anything, and he'll also kind of start to field your questions.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but we're happy to field any questions. We went at this for a pretty long time. Right before COVID, we thought we had our initial draft recommendations, and then kind of got back to it as we added different folks in different groups. And I think we came to a point where we did try to get as much stakeholder engagement and woven into this as we could. So what questions do you guys have for us?
You're definitely inspiring some chat dialogue. That's for sure. I had one, maybe two questions or a suggestion. Monique Martin from the department, is she working with your small group that's addressing definitions? And because she came and gave us the presentation about, sort of language, more inclusive language and anti-racist language. Is she working with the group?
I believe she's been working with Kelly and Fran behind the scenes, if I'm correct in stating that.
I see the secretary nodding.
And I can invite her to our meetings if you would like her to attend on a regular basis.
Yeah, we have Monique coming in to work with us on the next meeting as far as the language is concerned.
That's great. And it also seems like there's an opportunity there to make sure we have representation. I know Paul mentioned that they have some compatible initiatives, which I'm not sure if they're already represented or not in the group, but it seems like a good opportunity.
Yeah, and I think just important to remember, folks, too, that we had 4 and we narrowed it down to these 2 because we wanted something with meat on it that we could actually try to deliver on next year. So
yeah. I think they're very meaty. Chris, yes, and we're getting new ideas. That's great. Anyone have any questions for our co-chairs? I think it is very substantive and very clear, and I'm excited to see it narrowed down because it does feel like, there's work that we can do. I saw that as co-chairs, Matt and I have some assignments, some meetings to schedule. So that's.
We're glad you noticed that.
I did. I was like, oh, well done, well played. We're on.
Senator, could I don't know how the time is going. Is there time for me to?
I haven't seen a warning yet, so go ahead.
For either of the co-chairs, I saw in what you submitted and what you mentioned tonight that Laurel and Seaford, I think, were the 2 districts that you mentioned that had programs that you would not be mimicking, but that were sort of, examples of successful efforts in the professional development area. And I was just curious if you give us any additional detail about sort of what they did and what the outcome was and what we're hoping to see happen as a result of doing some version of that in these other schools.
Sure. I actually think the best person to probably tell would be Secretary Bunting, to be honest with you, because she kind of gave us most of the detail on that. So I don't want to overspeak on most of them since she has all that.
I know that in Laurel particularly, they had a challenge due to their test scores. At one point, they decided to go at it with full force and brought in the University of Delaware to work very closely with the teaching staff at the schools. It was amazing. The professional learning took hold. The administrators were involved. The full staffs were involved in their schools. And the turnaround within even the first year was absolutely startling. So they have kept up much of that practice. I know that the superintendent and assistant superintendent, along with the administrators in the buildings, are shoulder to shoulder when people could be shoulder to shoulder, but they are there learning on a daily basis when the University of Delaware comes in. And then of course they can do coaching and support and provide the financial support as well to continue that effort. But it was very successful. So that's what I know that the UD people were highly involved in. Seaford has used some outside sources, but they too have developed their leaders. And once you have strong leaders in buildings, along with the talent that we have among our teachers, things really can happen and they can be very successfully changed for the sake of students.
Thank you. And we're still fine on time. So if anyone has any other questions, I noticed there were some comments in the chat about things like working with educators around implicit bias and some other cultural responsiveness. Is it okay to, I mean, we shouldn't assume, but would that be something we could expect to see in that whole school approach specifically? Is that something that has to be mapped out?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of trying to listen and then also like people in the chat, kind of like I do all day in school. So this is a conversation we had a lot. And I think the main issue is our biggest concern was like, we didn't want to put all the money into just anti-bias training and culturally responsive training and not change the face of the workforce as far as teachers, because there are just a lot of people who are underrepresented in the teaching workforce. And I know it goes beyond race, like you guys were saying in the chat, for sure, but there's also a significant problem, especially with Black male educators and working in predominantly Black schools where there are, 90% white educators. There's only so much training that you can do with folks. And beyond that, there just needs to be representation. Like someone else was saying, like the most impactful teacher to me as a white student was a Black teacher when I was a child. And so that's really important to have the representation. So we want to make sure that we address both. And so I apologize if I didn't talk very much about any training and cultural responsiveness. We kind of prioritized the changing the demographics of the teacher workforce is a non-negotiable. And I know a lot of the training and research that I've done, like the People of Color Conference, was that students learn implicitly and they need to see themselves represented in the leadership in front of them. And there's not really much you can do to change that. Like that is a big part of their education. So I did focus on that, but yes, definitely all of the cultural responsiveness stuff, we've talked about that a lot. I really appreciate everybody's comments and I really hope that everybody will read the recommendations. Haley put the link in the chat, and please send us your feedback, because if we're missing anything, overlooking anything, something is not clear, you feel, please, like we want to know so that we can put that in for December 10th.
Great job, you guys. I think we're at time. So that's great. Of course, we invite everyone to continue to submit that feedback. We'll save all these comments so you guys have them. Just wanted to give you kudos. I know you have had probably the longest time to really dig deep for all the work groups, and I'm impressed with all the work groups. But I was so thrilled to see your charts of sort of steps and outcomes, it's really helpful for us to just even hold ourselves accountable for pushing it forward. So great job. Special shout out to Kelly and Fran, I know, for doing all the UD teamwork to support you. So well done. And so now we're going to move on to our third and final work group, and our youngest of our work groups, that we call our social determinants work group. So this group has been focusing on different types of factors that impact student success, both, from without, impacting within the classroom. So I'm very excited to hear from our co-chairs, Ray Jones Avery with the Wilmington Center for Education Equity and Public Policy, and Jeff Menzer, Superintendent of Colonial, to talk about what you guys have been up to.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. I'm going to start us off, I think, and then Ray's going to carry us home at the end of the for our slide. So, as Senator Lockman indicated, we are the newest group in the Reading Consortium. Is conceived in July during the pandemic. So we've actually never physically met each other. I think as a collective group, we've been Zooming along and working outside of the Zoom meetings feverishly to really present the short-term and long-term strategies around social determinants of behavior and health. During one of our early on meetings, we had a significant brainstorming session to try to identify what our focus areas would be. And during those brainstorming sessions, as you can see, three smaller subgroups emerged that we wanted to really focus on, try to help us define success and actually dig into what are those elements in each of these issue areas. We have early childhood development, birth to 5, and we had school and community partnerships for wraparound services, and then racial and social justice. As those groups were established, in one of our subsequent meetings, the group was tasked with identifying which of those 3 focus areas they were most passionate about, or they most felt comfortable bringing their resources and knowledge to. And we kind of split ourselves into 3. And from that rose some co-leaders of these smaller work groups. You can see there on this slide, Dawn Alexander and Shanika Perry under our early childhood development, birth to 5, Tamara Smith, and our school and community partnerships for wraparound services, and then Yasser Payne and Roger Harrison in racial and social justice. So that's kind of those are our focus areas. That's a little bit of how we got there. Can move to the next slide. You really jump in. We started to tease out like how we were going to present, given that we've been relatively new, and our good friend Matt Den gave us a really quick timeline of we need to have something by December to present to this group that can move forward as recommendations for the larger body. So we really had to think of a framework and a structure that each of these small work groups could operate under. And so there was a series of questions that they were to ask. And I thought it was on might have been on one of the earlier slides that I may have, if someone could go back just to let me just see if I missed it. Go back one more. All right, there's a slide missing then. All right, there's a slide that has, each work group had a series of questions, the same question that they were going to answer. And our 2 questions that we wanted to just share real quickly with the larger consortium is this, from each of the work groups, are why it's important. So why this focus area is important for the Reading Consortium to focus on. And then we really felt it was important that each of the work groups define success in those realms. And then on the PowerPoint, when you get this published and released, if you click, you'll see on the review the full memo, that will take you to the broader context of the work that's been going on outside of the regular meetings between the sub work group members, trying to marshal resources, analyze what's currently happening in Wilmington and around Newcastle County and across the state, and trying to align all these resources in the same direction under these focus groups. So I'm not going to read the slides to you in the interest of time. You can see on there, these groups are working currently on this. They will be coming back to the larger, our work group on next week. And we will be spending the bulk of our meeting next week talking about this. And I'll let Ray kind of talk about that as we get closer. So to the end of our time here tonight. So we have our early childhood group, then we get to our school and community partnership for wraparound services. These are definitely very broad focus areas, and that was by design because we knew that there were many smaller buckets underneath each that we could really tackle and look at more specifically. So we did try to stay in the broad and start narrowing it down. I think you'll see a theme throughout that we talk about barriers that the students are facing and what are our current opportunities to succeed. Trying to keep the language straightforward and direct. And a lot of these responses are designed to be the, I guess, the elevator speech for why this work group exists, so that when we're explaining it outside of our room, it makes sense, that it's not 100 million pivot tables and a lot of verbiage and acronyms that kind of confuse the general public. So we've really worked hard in the smaller groups to tailor these memos to be very portable, and anyone could pick it up and read it and kind of go, oh, I understand what they're talking about. And then the subsequent strategies, long-term and short-term, will have a little bit more meat on the bones as we get closer to December, when the smaller work groups begin to prioritize. I think the next work group, I think Ray, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. This racial and social justice and public education work group is led by Roger Harrison and Dr. Yasser Payne. And I am firmly of the opinion that this work group is the framing for the work of the Reading Consortium. And so why is this important? That the undeniable historical inequities in education in every aspect of our lives in Wilmington and throughout our country and our state can be directly attributed to racism and not the social construct of race. Racist policies have contributed to entrenched poverty through willful neglect and disinvestment. And in order for us to break the cycles and to really be catalysts for systemic change, we must really take a deep dive into policies and they don't have to mention race in order to be racist. So what does success look like? Success looks like unencumbered access, opportunities and resources for Brown and Hispanic children within the educational settings. So this this framing and this reality, and I'm looking at the chat as everyone is presenting, tends to make folks uncomfortable. Our premise is that unless we experience discomfort and extreme discomfort, that transformative change is likely not going to happen. And so we look forward to digging in to the work of this work group and being able to have time to have really honest, candid conversations as we start to add more definition to our recommendations. So the next slide just simply outlines that we will be having our next meeting as displayed on October 29th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. We invite you all to tune in to join us. And that's about it.
So I do want to take one quick chance to shout out the the work group leaders are here in attendance this evening. I saw Dr. Harrison, Dr. Payne, I saw Dawn, Tika, or Dawn and Tamara, and the last name, Shanika, are all here kind of listening and learning from the group. So we appreciate their efforts
Yeah.
both during the meetings and outside the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just on a personal note, as we prepare to close, my very first position was working for Jay Street and working under his tutelage. And that was my introduction to public education, advocacy and activism. And as others have thanked Mr. Street, I too want to do that. It's not a 1 year, 2 year. I mean, we're talking 40, 50 years. And his persistence has really been unmatched. And so while many groups were talking about the antiquated funding system and the inequities that are inherent and in the system itself, Mr. Street brought this matter to the forefront in a bold and a courageous way, and unfortunately, had to bring forward litigation in order to push the system to change. And so I just want to publicly thank him. I privately thank him. He has a big mouth, but he's very humble. He really is. So thank you so much, Jay, and the names of people that will never be mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate that. I saw in the chat, Jason Bork, our DSU liaison, is populating the memos in there for the links. He's been awesome, superstar, helping keeping us organized, like herding cats or ants or whatever. We are all over the place constantly. So we do appreciate his patience with us and the support DSU has given us. Likewise, any questions that you have that you come across as you're reading those documents, please email Jason and he will be diligently making sure they get to the appropriate folks. And like everybody else this evening who seems to be thanking him, I am going to thank Jay Street also. I do appreciate his tireless efforts on behalf of children. I don't go as far back as a relationship with him, but he and I go back, and we've definitely, met, and we've done a lot. We've tried to do a lot of good things, and I really appreciate everything that he's done for the Colonial School District, but also for students in Newcastle County as well. So Jay, thanks for your tireless efforts. It does go appreciated by all educators.
That's awesome. Anyone have any thoughts for social determinants? Definitely some very, very big ideas there, and I'm excited to see, what specifics we can move on for sure. I think it's fantastic. And it also, I'm glad folks can see the upcoming meetings. So anyone who's here who's not already on a subcommittee, of course, members of the public are always welcome to take part in all of these conversations as these ideas get refined, or by emailing our staff as well. Well, anybody wanted to offer any comments or thoughts for Jeff, Ray, and their team? Cool. All right, we've got some good thoughts going in the chat. We'll make sure to save those and ensure that all committee leaders and consortium members get to see the thoughts that are flowing today. Great. All right. I think that's good. Thank you, guys. All right. So we're just going to high level review what has been heard. There's been a lot said in the last hour or 45 minutes or so in terms of what we're looking at as consortium goals really through the beginning, I would say, as we enter 2021. So, we'll of course have the opportunity as we pivot into the new year to revisit some of these things after we put a pin in them in December. But as we heard from the educator work group, they have a well-designed implementation plan for the two projects and programs that they would like to see, fully implemented. And so that will be the efforts there for the funding and governance work group. It's that honing in on the final version of some referendum reform legislation, and potentially working on our consortium response to the funding lawsuit. We can discuss that a little bit this evening in the few minutes we have, or also next week when we reconvene on Wednesday. The social determinants work group is continuing to work in the short term on some legislative proposals for consideration, and long-term, a larger scale plan with strategies for the subsequent half of the legislative year, legislative session. And then there are some other items that really belong to all of us outside of the work groups that we wanted to touch on. As we all know, we really backburnered our redistricting efforts, which were intended obviously to be very robust, really just as we were getting started, and decided instead to pivot to the funding conversation. We had, of course, a bill that gave us powers to do redistricting work in a very finite timeline. And I think Representative Chicocha and I in particular, having filed that initial legislation, discussed the need that we will need to revisit that, look at some new dates to extend that. We're not going to be delivering the type of complex redistricting proposal by December 31st that we had hoped, because it just did not seem appropriate to tax our stakeholders and our partners, in particular our district partners, with that effort in the midst of a pandemic that is still very challenging for all of our educators. So we appreciate that. And we'll be revisiting that specific piece of legislation and hopefully being able to renew and extend those powers with a different timeline. We'll also, of course, in the new year, be looking at our consortium composition, making sure if there's any particular roles in the consortium that are currently unfilled, essentially, that we fill those. We make sure we continue to have such a wonderfully active group of people working together, and also revisiting what work groups need to continue or perhaps to subside. Again, we decided early on we were not going to be a standing committee type of an entity. We were going to have work groups focused on deliverables, and we want to just make sure that they're keeping relevant, active, and we're not just burning people out. And also talking about the types of focus those groups can have. We also have the ongoing mandate to deliver data reports on public education that actually parses out how City of Wilmington students are performing. So that will continue and as part of our annual report to the legislature. So that's some ongoing goals and deliverables that we continue to focus on as a consortium. Anybody have any questions about any of that, or any thoughts or suggestions? I know that Aaron had a thought that he put in the chat. I'm not sure if he can voice it because I know he's double zooming right now. Oh, there you are. Boom.
I stay focused. So I did want to say thank you for calling me out. Want to say that there's some great work that's been taking place with the settlement, but my fear is that money does not solve problems, and so money plus vision, a lot of hard work, will lead to the outcomes we want to see. And so would love to see if we could spend time, not tonight, but spending time looking at how we as the Reading Consortium can assist with making sure that the funding leads to the outcomes. And so would love to look at that for future meetings.
I second that.
I do too.
I'm still muted.
We have to remember.
So are we making a motion of some kind?
No, I'm agreeing with Aaron. What I'm saying is, if we continue to do the same thing for the kids, we're going to continue to get the same results, no matter how much money we throw at it. That's all.
If Ms. Matos agrees, I agree 100%.
200% agree with yourself. Well, so it sounds like, and I don't know if everyone can attend on Wednesday as well, but I think that that's really our opportunity to talk about how does the consortium engage with this? Do we need a new working group to be specifically focused on it? Is this something that funding and governance has space for, or does that work group need to maybe now shift more to governance questions? So these are the kinds of just sort of structural mechanical things that I think we'll be discussing next week. So if folks want to offer suggestions now, make recommendations of the way you would like to see us go, that's what we'll be diving in on Wednesday. Yes, ma'am.
I got a suggestion.
Yes, please.
I'm going to suggest that we wrap our arms around the Rodell Foundation and the work that they have done for, I can't even say how many years. But if we look at the work they've done, it will cut our work in half. Let's embrace them. Let's use what they have, because the work that they've done is very good work. And it doesn't make sense to continue wasting time when some of this stuff has been done, not only by the Rodell Foundation, but all the other reports that have been done throughout the years. Use that, build on it, so that we can get to the business of changing the situation for our students.
Hear, hear. Yes, Secretary Benting.
We might also want to think about how we can help our school leaders, because the money for opportunity funding is distributed according to an application submitted by each entity. For example, Aaron and every superintendent, every charter school leader. So we need to possibly have conversation also with the people who are designing the applications, who are filling out the applications. Though the money has to be spent solely for ELs or low-income students, there's a lot that we could be influencing as a consortium as to what might go into those applications. We have an opportunity to work with leadership to better direct the funding.
Senator Lockman.
Yes, please.
So Secretary's Bunting comment, I think we got to look at two things. Look at the assets within the communities that we all serve, especially relative to Wilmington and Newcastle County, because we don't have static communities. You know, even what we see as it relates to COVID right now, where you have many households who are navigating 2 or 3 different school districts within that same household. And as we talk about sparsing funding, you know, we can coalesce around the assets and or needs within our given community so that we're all leaning into the same issues and supporting our communities in the same manner, and maximizing the funding and really directing it to where the true need is. So irregardless if I'm in Howard High School and my sibling is at a HB DuPont, at least that family and that community's needs are actually being met and not being forced to navigate. So we got to take a collective impact strategy to how we're actually looking at this work to align around some common goals and then align the funding that's being allocated to address those specific needs. So I think we got to take a theoretical framework of a collective impact kind of framework to really address the broader community needs and not look at it in isolation of district boundaries.
Yeah, that cross-district collaboration, I know it's something that has come up before, and
we are collaborating, so I think there's momentum there for us to really
Great.
leverage and really capitalize on that.
Okay. All right, some good stuff popping up. Anything else? I don't want to say anything because I want to see what else surfaces. I think this is good. And again, I think that's really important, particularly to Maria's point about, we're not trying to be duplicative of just ideation. We're trying to make sure that we're actually getting done things, maybe things that have already been proposed, but actually bringing them to fruition is really what we're here for, not just to talk about it. So I think what Superintendent Green and Secretary Bunting are saying are really excellent possibilities and ways that we can actually do that. So,
Senator.
Is there someone who has a comment? Yes, Councilman Street, please.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate all the very kind words that everybody's given me this evening. But the fact of the matter is I've just done what I was trained to do by Herb Morris, Hicks Anderson, Judge Williams, and Mr. Redden. I want to thank, as the Chancellor said in one of his opinions, the courageous parents and the courageous homeowners that came forward and had the courage to be the backbone of this litigation. And I want to thank our excellent legal team, Rich Morris, Karen Lance, Dwayne Benson, and I want to thank the law firm of Arnold and Porter for intervening so we could match fire with fire. But having, hopefully the General Assembly will pass the money. The key to this is really going to rest with y'all, at least as it relates to the city of Wilmington. And it's not going to be an easy task and you're not going to always agree, but we're finally going to have to come up with something. And as I have said repeatedly publicly, and I know the mayor was on for a long time, as we go through this, Wilmington, Delaware cannot continue to be the only city in the United States of America where the city as a government has no authority and no responsibility over the educational destiny of its own children. So you've got a lot of work to do, and I appreciate all the time, energy, and effort all of you are bringing forward as you participate in this process, which is not going to be easy. And when it comes to redistricting, you're not going to agree about it.
Well, you know, this is meant to be a space where we can bring together these disparate ideas and come up with things that we can act on, or to the governor's point, you know, things that we can actually deliver. So strong agreement. And my hope is that this is sort of the perfect, I guess, sort of meeting point of history and the future and the right people around the table that we can do that. So if anyone else has any further comment from the consortium, please voice that. Otherwise, we're going to go to comment for non-consortium members. So last call. Anybody? Thank you again, Council.
Got a hand up.
Oh, I can't see everybody. Sorry.
Bill.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, everyone, we're good. We're ready to go. Perfect. All right. So we're going to public comment. Bill Doolittle.
No surprise. First, I'd like to thank you for all the progress you've made. I haven't made a few meetings and the progress is very clear. I did want to speak a little bit about the settlement, and I'll start off with the non-financial stuff. First off, I see the consortium has recognized the importance of adequacy. I can say that I was extremely disappointed that the financial analysis didn't have a requirement within it for an adequacy study. I mean, literally the state has spent many times dollars on fiscal analysis, but they continue to refuse to include an adequacy study in it to know where we really need to be to meet the needs of our students. Jumping over to the fiscal side, obviously, and I agree that the state agreed to what they could actually agree to now. That's the good news. The bad news is it still represents less than 20% of what's needed to meet the needs of our students in poverty and our ELLs. And that's based on the stakeholder work groups, fiscal analysis of what was needed to meet the needs. So the good news is it does put us on a trajectory. So I hope that 2025 is not the end point, but is a trajectory to keep increasing funding. Even if it takes 20 years, as long as we're making progress, we will get to an end point. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, Bill. It's good to see you. Good to hear you. Let's see. I'm trying to scroll and see if I can see any other hands. I always just call out because I may not be able to see you. I'm going through everybody. All right. That might be it. Okay. Well, if so, wow, we actually beat our time. And I just want to thank everybody so much for being here. I think a lot was covered, a lot was said, and there's a lot to do. I'm pleased to have had the opportunity to already collaborate with those who are here. We always know that we can expand that, our partnerships and who's around the table with us. And we look forward to continuing to do that. You know, on our path to accomplishing this work. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you at work group meetings and all other kinds of meetings. And we'll be back here for our full consortium meeting in December to finalize these recommendations. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Maria.
Thank you. Have a good evening.